The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Thomas woke up to the familiar sound of paws padding across his bedroom floor. Rex, his loyal German shepherd, nudged his hand with a wet nose, right on schedule. For the past 4 years, this had been their morning ritual. "Good morning, buddy," Thomas said, reaching out to feel the dog's soft fur. Unlike most pet owners, Thomas couldn't see his companion. He had lost his sight during his final military tour overseas when an unexpected explosion changed his life forever. Thomas swung his legs over the side of the bed and felt for his cane propped against the nightstand. Rex stayed close, patiently waiting as Thomas went through his morning routine. The apartment wasn't large, but it was home. Everything had its place, a necessity when you navigate the world through touch, sound, and memory. "We've got a busy day ahead," Thomas told Rex as he filled the dog's water bowl. "The support center needs help with the new group of veterans." Rex wasn't just any service dog. Before coming into Thomas's life, he had served on the police force as a highly trained K-9 officer. When Thomas needed a service animal, Rex had been reassigned from active duty to become his eyes. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing day. Thomas ran his fingers over his watch, feeling the raised dots that told him it was just after 7. "Perfect timing," he said, clipping Rex's harness into place. The German shepherd stood tall and alert, ready for duty. As they left the apartment, Thomas could feel the change in the air. Spring had finally arrived after a long winter. The sense of blooming flowers mixed with the usual city smells. Rex guided him down the familiar path, navigating around obstacles with practiced ease. "Morning, Thomas," called out a friendly voice from the corner store. "Morning, Joe," Thomas replied, recognizing the shop owner's voice immediately. "Busy day ahead?" "You know it, the downtown festival starts this weekend. Streets are already filling up with vendors setting up their booths." Thomas nodded. "We'll be careful out there. Come on, Rex." As they continued their journey, Thomas noticed the increasing noise around them. More cars, more voices, more of everything. The festival always brought crowds to their usually quiet neighborhood. Rex stayed focused, guiding Thomas safely through the busy sidewalks. 3 blocks from home, they approached a particularly busy intersection. Rex paused at the curb, waiting for the right moment to cross. Thomas could hear the impatient rumble of engines, the chatter of pedestrians, and somewhere nearby, the revving of motorcycles. "Steady, Rex," Thomas said softly, trusting his companion's judgment. The dog had never let him down, not once in 4 years. The walk signal must have changed because Rex gently pulled forward. Thomas stepped off the curb, cane sweeping slightly ahead of him out of habit, though he trusted Rex completely. The harness in his hand provided a connection to the dog that felt like an extension of himself. The noise of the motorcycles grew louder, a group of riders waiting at the light. Thomas didn't think much of it. In a city this size, all sorts of people shared the streets. Rex had been trained to handle distractions far worse than loud engines. A phone rang somewhere nearby, followed by snippets of conversation. Children laughed as they passed by with their parents. A street musician played guitar on the corner. These were the sounds of Thomas's world, his way of seeing the life around him. As they reached the halfway point of the crosswalk, Rex suddenly slowed his pace. Thomas could feel a subtle change in the dog's movement, not fear, but increased alertness. Something or someone was too close for comfort. "What is it, boy?" Thomas asked quietly, trusting Rex's instincts. The German shepherd adjusted his position slightly, placing his body more firmly between Thomas and whatever had caught his attention. The light must have changed because the rumble of engines grew louder. One motorcycle in particular seemed to be revving aggressively close to them. Thomas tightened his grip on Rex's harness, quickening their pace toward the safety of the opposite curb. Little did Thomas know that this ordinary morning was about to become anything but routine. Rex's training as both a service dog and former police K-9 was moments away from being put to the test in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The crosswalk signal beeped steadily, counting down the seconds Thomas and Rex had to reach the other side. The morning traffic had built up faster than usual, with cars and motorcycles lined up at the red light, engines humming impatiently. As Thomas and Rex carefully made their way across, a group of 5 motorcyclists waited at the light, their bikes rumbling loudly. One rider, a stocky man with a faded leather jacket and a helmet decorated with flame decals, drummed his fingers against his handlebar. His name was Ray, though nobody in the waiting crowd knew him. At 32 years old, Ray had already built himself a reputation in certain circles, none of it good. His friends called him Rage for a reason, and today he was living up to that nickname. "Come on, move it," Ray muttered under his breath, watching Thomas and Rex crossing slowly in front of the waiting traffic. The light was about to change, and Ray was already running late for a meeting with people you didn't keep waiting. Thomas couldn't see Ray's glare, but he could feel the impatience in the air. The noise of revving engines grew louder, and Rex moved closer to Thomas's leg, a subtle signal that something wasn't right. Thomas tightened his grip on the dog's harness. "Easy, boy," Thomas whispered. "We're almost there." The light changed just as they reached the curb. Ray twisted his throttle hard, shooting forward with a roar of his engine. He cut his turn too close, nearly grazing Thomas's leg. Rex reacted instantly, pulling Thomas back from the curb just in time. "Hey, watch it," shouted a woman waiting at the bus stop. "He's blind." "Can't you see the dog?" Ray circled back around the block, his anger building. He'd been called out publicly, and now he had an audience. His friends were watching. In Ray's mind, nobody embarrassed him like that. He pulled up to the curb where Thomas and Rex now stood, waiting for the crowd to thin out before continuing their journey. "What's your problem?" Ray called out, his voice cutting through the street noise. "Control your dog, man. It got in my way." Thomas turned toward the voice, his face calm despite the confrontation. "My dog is under control. He's a service animal." Ray scoffed. "Yeah, well, he nearly scratched my bike. Do you know how much this paint job cost?" People were starting to stare. A small crowd gathered, watching the scene unfold. Thomas stood tall, his military posture evident even years after service. Rex remained perfectly positioned at his side, alert but disciplined. "My apologies if there was any misunderstanding," Thomas said evenly. "We were in the crosswalk with the right-of-way." Ray wasn't interested in reason. He dismounted his bike, the heavy boots hitting the pavement with a thud that Thomas could feel through the sidewalk. Rex sensed the approaching threat and shifted position, moving slightly forward to stand between his owner and the angry man. "Your mutt needs to learn some respect," Ray said, now just feet away from them. The smell of leather and cigarettes grew stronger as he approached. A teenage boy nearby pulled out his phone and started recording. Others in the crowd began to murmur, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. "Sir, please step back," Thomas said firmly, his hand steady on Rex's harness. "My dog is working. You shouldn't approach a service animal without permission." Ray looked down at Rex, whose ears were now alert, body tense but disciplined. The German Shepherd's eyes never left Ray, tracking his every movement with the precision that came from years of professional training. "Working? He's just a dog," Ray sneered. He took another step forward, deliberately intimidating. Rex remained steady, but his posture changed subtly, a shift that only Thomas could feel through the harness. It was the same stance Rex had taken years ago when protecting his police handler in dangerous situations. "Back off, man," called a delivery driver who had stopped his truck to watch. "Can't you see he's blind? The dog is his guide." "Mind your own business," Ray shut back without taking his eyes off Thomas and Rex. His friends on their motorcycles were watching, waiting to see what he would do next. Ray had never been one to back down, especially with an audience. Thomas could hear the shuffling of feet, the murmurs of the growing crowd, the clicking of phone cameras. He couldn't see the danger, but he could feel it approaching. His years in combat had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to explode. "Rex, steady," Thomas commanded quietly, bracing himself for whatever was coming. The dog's body tensed under his hand, ready to protect yet restrained by years of rigorous training. No one in the crowd could have predicted what would happen next, least of all Ray, who had no idea that the German Shepherd he was confronting was far more than just a service dog. Ray took another step forward, ignoring the growing tension in the air. The crowd had formed a loose circle around them, smartphones pointing in their direction. Thomas could hear the shuffling of feet, the hushed whispers, but his focus remained on the situation at hand. "I said back off," Thomas repeated, his voice calm but firm. Years of military training had taught him how to handle confrontation without escalation. We don't want any trouble." Rex stood perfectly still, his body the only barrier between Thomas and the angry motorcyclist. The German Shepherd's training was evident in every muscle, alert, protective, but controlled. "Your dog needs to learn who's boss around here," Ray snapped, his patience wearing thin. He glanced back at his friends, who were watching with amused expressions from their bikes. One of them made a taunting gesture, egging Ray on. A middle-aged woman stepped forward from the crowd. "Leave him alone. Can't you see the white cane? He's blind, and that's his service dog." Ray barely acknowledged her. "I don't care if he's blind or not. That dog almost made me crash my bike." "That's not what happened," called out a young man who had been waiting at the bus stop. "We all saw you. You drove too close to them when they had the right-of-way." Thomas could sense Rex's breathing changing slightly, a subtle shift he recognized from their years together. The dog was assessing the threat, calculating, just as he'd been trained to do during his K-9 service years. "Sir," Thomas said, trying one last time to defuse the situation, "my dog is a trained service animal. By law, you shouldn't interfere with him while he's working. Please, let's both go our separate ways." Something in Thomas's reasonable tone seemed to infuriate Ray even more. Maybe it was the calm dignity, or perhaps it was the feeling of being made to look foolish in front of his friends. Whatever the reason, Ray's face flushed with anger. "Laws," Ray scoffed. "I make my own rules." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for those watching. Ray stepped forward and delivered a sharp, sudden kick to Rex's side. The impact made a dull thud that silenced the crowd instantly. Rex let out a yelp of pain that cut through Thomas like a knife. In that moment, Thomas wished desperately that he could see, to locate the attacker, to protect his loyal companion, to do something besides stand there feeling helpless. But Rex did not attack. Despite the pain, despite every instinct that might have told the powerful German Shepherd to defend himself, he held his position. His training as both a police K-9 and a service dog ran too deep to be overcome by a single act of aggression. "What did you do?" Thomas's voice had changed, anger breaking through his composed exterior. "Did you just hurt my dog?" The crowd erupted in outrage. "He kicked the dog. Someone call the police." "I got it all on video." Ray suddenly seemed to realize he'd crossed a line. The faces in the crowd had changed from curious onlookers to angry witnesses. Several people were on their phones, presumably calling the authorities. His friends on their motorcycles looked uneasy, no longer amused by the confrontation. "The dog lunged at me," Ray said defensively, but the lie fell flat. Too many people had seen what really happened. A shop owner from across the street hurried over with a bottle of water and a clean towel. "Is your dog okay?" he asked Thomas, kneeling down to examine Rex. "I saw everything." That was completely unprovoked. Thomas reached down, his hands gently feeling Rex's side where the kick had landed. The German Shepherd whimpered softly but remained standing, still focused on his duty to protect Thomas. "I think he's hurt," Thomas said, the worry evident in his voice. "Rex, sit." The dog obeyed immediately, though Thomas could feel him trembling slightly under his touch. In the distance, the wail of police sirens grew louder. Someone in the crowd must have called 911, reporting the assault on a service animal. Ray glanced nervously at the approaching sirens, then back at his motorcycle. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "It's just a dog." But as he took a step toward his bike, planning to leave before the police arrived, several bystanders moved to block his path. "You're not going anywhere," said a tall construction worker, crossing his arms. "You just assaulted a service animal. That's a crime." Thomas knelt beside Rex, one hand reassuringly on the dog's head, the other still gripping his white cane. Despite the chaos around them, despite the pain Rex must have been feeling, the German Shepherd remained focused on his job. A testament to his extraordinary training and devotion. What Ray and the gathering crowd didn't know, what nobody except Thomas fully understood, was exactly what kind of dog Rex really was. The German Shepherd's background as a highly trained police K-9 had equipped him with skills far beyond those of an ordinary service animal. And as the police sirens grew closer, that background was about to become very relevant indeed. The wail of police sirens grew louder as two patrol cars pulled up to the scene. Ray stood frozen, suddenly aware of the trouble he'd gotten himself into. His friends on their motorcycles exchanged nervous glances, clearly debating whether to stay or leave. Thomas knelt beside Rex, his hands gently examining the dog for injuries. Despite the pain, Rex remained focused on his duty, his eyes never leaving Ray. This wasn't the first time the German Shepherd had faced danger. Years of police work had taught him to stay calm under pressure. "It's okay, boy," Thomas whispered, finding a tender spot on Rex's ribcage that made the dog flinch slightly. "You did good. You did real good." The crowd parted as 4 police officers approached. The first officer, a veteran with salt and pepper hair and a weathered face, took in the scene with practiced eyes. The second, a younger officer with a notebook already in hand, began asking bystanders what had happened. That man kicked his service dog, explained the shop owner who had brought water for Rex. The blind gentleman was just crossing the street when this guy on the motorcycle started harassing them. "I have it all on video," added a college student, holding up her phone. He deliberately kicked the dog. It was completely unprovoked. The older officer approached Thomas, his steps slowing as he got a better look at Rex. Something in his expression changed, a flash of recognition. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked Thomas. "Is your dog injured?" Thomas straightened up, his military background evident in his posture. "I'm fine, officer, but my dog took a hard kick to his side. He needs to see a vet." The officer knelt down, looking more closely at Rex. "This dog, what's his name?" "Rex," Thomas replied. "He's my service animal." The officer's eyes widened slightly. "Rex, German Shepherd, about 7 years old. Used to work K9 with the downtown precinct." Now it was Thomas's turn to be surprised. "Yes, that's right. How did you know?" A small smile crossed the officer's face. "I thought I recognized him. Officer Rex was legendary in the department. Best tracking dog we ever had." He reached out, letting Rex sniff his hand before gently patting the dog's head. "I worked with him on a few cases before he was reassigned to service work." This exchange caught the attention of the other officers. The younger one stepped closer, peering at Rex with newfound interest. "Wait, is this the Rex? The one who found those missing kids in the state park 3 years ago?" he asked, excitement evident in his voice. Thomas nodded. "That's what they told me when I got him. He had quite a career before becoming my eyes." Ray, who had been standing uncomfortably under the watchful eye of the third officer, suddenly looked even more worried. "Look, I didn't know it was some special dog, all right? It was just a mistake." The older officer stood up, his friendly demeanor vanishing as he turned to face Ray. "A mistake? You deliberately kicked a service animal guiding a blind man. That alone is a serious offense, but this isn't just any service animal. This is a former police K9 officer." The color drained from Ray's face as the officer continued. "In this state, assaulting a police dog, current or retired, carries additional penalties. It's considered an assault on a law enforcement officer." One of Ray's friends revved his motorcycle, ready to leave, but the fourth officer quickly blocked his path. "Nobody goes anywhere until we sort this out." Meanwhile, a small crowd had gathered around Thomas and Rex, offering support. A young woman who worked at a nearby veterinary clinic had arrived and was carefully examining Rex's injury. "The ribs don't seem broken," she told Thomas, her voice gentle. "But he'll need x-rays to be sure. There's definitely bruising. Our clinic is just 2 blocks away. We can take him right now if you'd like." Thomas nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." The older officer turned back to Thomas. "We'll need your statement, sir, but that can wait until after your dog gets medical attention. One of us will accompany you to the vet clinic." As arrangements were being made to transport Rex to the veterinary clinic, more details about the German Shepherd's background as a police K9 began to circulate among the officers and bystanders. Stories of his bravery, his successful missions, and his impeccable training added to the outrage people felt about what Ray had done. The younger officer approached Ray, who was now sitting on the curb, looking defeated. "You really picked the wrong dog to mess with," he said, not bothering to hide his disapproval. "Rex isn't just any service dog. Before helping this gentleman, he saved more lives than you'll probably ever know." Ray stared at the ground, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. "How was I supposed to know that?" "You weren't," the officer replied simply. "That's why you don't kick any dog, especially not one wearing a service vest and guiding a person with a disability. But the fact that you attacked a former police K9 means you're in a whole different level of trouble now." As Thomas prepared to leave for the veterinary clinic with Rex, he could hear the officers reading Ray his rights. The crowd that had witnessed everything was still there, many offering to email their video footage to the police as evidence. Despite the pain he must have been feeling, Rex remained the consummate professional, calm, alert, and still focused on guiding and protecting Thomas. It was this unwavering dedication that had made him an exceptional police dog and now made him an extraordinary service animal. What had begun as a simple morning walk had turned into something much more significant, a story that would soon spread far beyond the small crowd gathered on that street corner. The veterinary clinic was small but clean, with bright lights and the faint smell of antiseptic in the air. Thomas sat in the waiting room, his white cane resting against his leg, hands clasped tightly together. The older police officer, who had introduced himself as Officer Wilson, sat beside him. "Rex is in good hands," Officer Wilson assured him. "Dr. Lee is one of the best vets in the city. She treats all our current K9 units." Thomas nodded, but the worry was evident on his face. "How did you recognize Rex? It's been years since he worked with the department." Officer Wilson chuckled softly. "Some dogs you just don't forget. Rex was special from the beginning. Smart as a whip and brave as they come. When he was reassigned to service work, a lot of officers were disappointed. But knowing he went to help a veteran, well, that made it easier." Before Thomas could respond, the clinic door opened and several more police officers filed in. Thomas couldn't see them, but he could hear the shuffle of boots and the crackle of radios. Officer Wilson stood up to greet them. "What's going on?" Thomas asked, feeling the sudden change in the atmosphere. "Word got out about what happened to Rex," Officer Wilson explained. "These are officers who worked with him back in the day. They came to check on him. And on you." One of the newcomers approached, her footsteps light but purposeful. "You must be Thomas," she said, her voice warm with respect. "I'm Officer Parker. I was Rex's handler for 2 years before he was reassigned." Thomas extended his hand, which she shook firmly. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Rex is an amazing dog. He's changed my life completely." Officer Parker sat down beside him. "May I ask what happened today? We got the basics over the radio, but I'd like to hear it from you." As Thomas recounted the morning's events, more officers gathered around, listening intently. When he described how Rex had stayed calm after being kicked, refusing to leave his post or attack, despite the provocation, Officer Parker nodded proudly. "That's classic Rex," she said. "His self-control was always exceptional. We once had a suspect throw a brick at him during a pursuit, hit him right on the shoulder. Rex didn't even flinch, just kept on the trail until we made the arrest. Afterward, we found out he'd been running on a cracked bone for the last quarter mile." Thomas's eyes widened in amazement. "I had no idea. They told me he had been a police dog, but they didn't share many details about his service record." One by one, the officers began sharing stories about Rex's time on the force. How he had tracked a lost child through 3 miles of woods during a thunderstorm. How he had once found crucial evidence buried under 6 inches of snow that broke open a major case. How he had saved Officer Parker's life by detecting an armed suspect hiding in a closet during a routine search. "The thing about Rex," another officer explained, "is that he never seemed to forget a face or a scent. We used to joke that he had a better memory than most of the detectives." As they talked, a news van pulled up outside the clinic. Through the window, Thomas could hear the reporter discussing the assault on a blind man's service animal that turned out to be a decorated police K9 officer. The veterinarian emerged from the examination room, clipboard in hand. The room fell silent as everyone waited for her report. "Good news," she announced. "No broken bones, just some nasty bruising along his ribcage. Rex is going to be sore for a few days, but there shouldn't be any permanent damage. He's already up and alert, actually trying to get back to work. I had to convince him to stay still for the x-rays." Thomas let out a sigh of relief, his shoulders sagging as the tension drained away. "Can I see him now?" "Of course," the vet replied. "He's been asking for you in his own way." As Thomas was led to the examination room, Officer Parker turned to her colleagues. What's happening with the guy who did this? Officer Wilson's expression hardened. He's been booked on multiple charges: assault on a service animal, interfering with a person with disabilities, and under our state's law, assaulting a police K-9, even a retired one, carries the same penalty as assaulting an officer. Good, Officer Parker said firmly. He picked the wrong dog to mess with. In the examination room, Thomas knelt beside Rex, who immediately pressed his head against Thomas's hand. Despite the pain he must have been feeling, Rex's tail wagged slowly at his owner's touch. "Hey boy," Thomas whispered, carefully running his hands over the dog to reassure himself that Rex was indeed okay. "Sounds like you've been holding out on me. Never told me you were such a big hero." Outside in the waiting room, more officers continued to arrive, along with K-9 units and their handlers. The story had spread quickly through department channels, and the response was overwhelming. What had begun as a simple case of assault had transformed into something much larger, a reunion of sorts, and a recognition of an extraordinary partnership between a blind veteran and a retired police dog who had found a second calling. Little did Ray know when he kicked that German Shepherd that morning, he hadn't just attacked any service dog. He had assaulted a local legend, a dog whose police work had impacted countless lives throughout the city. And now, as media vans gathered outside the clinic and social media began buzzing with the story, Rex was about to become famous all over again. By evening, the story had spread like wildfire across social media. Video clips of the incident played on local news channels, showing Ray kicking Rex, the dog's remarkable restraint, and the crowd's outraged reaction. But it was the revelation about Rex's background as a decorated police K-9 that truly captivated public attention. Thomas sat in his living room, phone constantly buzzing with notifications. His army buddy Pete had come over to help him manage the sudden flood of messages and calls. "Another news station wants an interview," Pete said, scrolling through Thomas's emails. "And the mayor's office called. They want you and Rex to attend some community safety event next month." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "All this attention, it's overwhelming." Rex lay on his special bed near Thomas's chair, resting but alert. The vet had prescribed anti-inflammatory medication for his bruised ribs, but otherwise, the resilient German Shepherd was recovering well. "How's he doing?" Pete asked, looking over at Rex. Thomas reached down to gently stroke Rex's head. "Tough as always. The vet said he needs to take it easy for a week, but you know Rex, he still wants to work." The doorbell rang, and Rex's ears perked up despite his injury. Pete went to answer it, returning with a middle-aged woman carrying a large gift basket. "Mr. Thomas," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "I'm from the Downtown Business Association. We wanted to express our support and bring you and Rex some things." Thomas stood to greet her. "That's very kind, but really not necessary." "It absolutely is," she insisted. "Our members took up a collection. The basket has treats for Rex from the gourmet pet shop, gift cards for the best restaurants in town, and," she hesitated, her voice growing serious, "we've also set up a fund to cover all of Rex's veterinary expenses." Thomas was speechless for a moment. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." She wasn't the last visitor. Throughout the evening, people stopped by. Neighbors Thomas had never met before, veterans who had heard about a fellow serviceman in trouble, families with children who had drawn pictures of Rex in a superhero cape. Meanwhile, across town at the county jail, Ray was having a very different experience. His bail hearing had been set for the following morning, but the charges against him were stacking up. Assault on a service animal, interfering with a disabled person's rights, and under the state's enhanced protection laws for police animals, an additional felony for assaulting a former police K-9. Ray's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and wrinkled suit, sat across from him in the visitation room. "The video evidence is damning," the attorney explained, tapping his pen against his legal pad. "Multiple witnesses, clear footage of you kicking the dog, and the dog's history as a police K-9 makes this particularly serious." "How was I supposed to know it was some special dog?" Ray protested, slumping in his chair. The attorney sighed. "It doesn't matter if you knew. What matters is that you assaulted a service animal guiding a blind man. Even without the dog's police background, that's a serious offense." Back at Thomas's house, his phone rang again. Pete checked the caller ID and raised his eyebrows. "It's the police chief," he said, handing Thomas the phone. Thomas answered, surprised by the call. The chief's deep voice was respectful but enthusiastic. "Mr. Thomas, I wanted to personally check on you and Rex. How's he doing?" "He's resting comfortably, sir." "Thank you for asking." "Good, good," the chief replied. "Listen, I've been talking with my team. What happened today has struck a chord with our department. Rex was one of our finest, and seeing him still serving with such distinction, well, it's inspired us." Thomas listened as the chief continued. "We'd like to honor Rex at our annual K9 unit ceremony next month. Present him with a special service medal for his dual career. Would you be willing to attend?" Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "Sir, that would be an honor. Rex deserves the recognition, even if he doesn't know what it means." "I think Rex understands more than most humans," the chief chuckled. "There's something else. We're launching a new community program to pair retired police K9s with veterans in need of service animals. We'd like to name it after Rex, if that's all right with you." By the time Thomas hung up, he was overwhelmed with emotion. Pete handed him a tissue, pretending not to notice the tears. "Sounds like Rex is becoming a celebrity," Pete remarked. "He always was special," Thomas said quietly, reaching down to stroke the dog's fur. "From the first day they paired us together, I knew there was something different about him. The trainers said he adapted to service work faster than any dog they'd ever seen. Now I understand why." Outside, a small group had gathered on the sidewalk in front of Thomas's house. Some held candles, others carried signs with messages like "Justice for Rex" and "Protect our service animals." A candlelight vigil had formed spontaneously, organized through social media by people touched by the story. The public outcry continued to build on social platforms. #JusticeForX was trending locally, with people sharing their own stories about service animals and the vital work they do. Veterans groups and disability advocates seized the moment to push for stronger legal protections for service animals. In less than 24 hours, what had begun as a simple act of cruelty had transformed into a movement, and at the center of it all was a remarkable German Shepherd who had served his community in 2 different uniforms, first as a police K9, and now as the eyes for a blind veteran. As night fell, Thomas sat beside Rex's bed, gently checking the bandage on his side. "You're quite the hero, buddy," he whispered. "Always have been, I guess. Just didn't know how much until today." Rex looked up at his owner, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand every word. Then, despite his injuries, he struggled to his feet and nudged Thomas's hand with his nose, his way of saying it was time to go to bed. Even now, he was still on duty, still guiding, still protecting. Some things, it seemed, were too deeply ingrained to ever change. The heart of a service dog, once forged, remained true forever. 6 months had passed since that fateful morning when Ray kicked Thomas's guide dog. The seasons had changed, summer had faded into fall, and now winter was approaching. But the impact of that single moment continued to ripple through the community. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and spectators as Thomas made his way carefully up the ramp, Rex guiding him with the same steady precision he always showed. The German Shepherd had fully recovered from his injuries, though Thomas sometimes noticed him favoring his right side slightly on cold mornings. "Quite a turnout," whispered Pete, who had come to support his friend on this important day. "There must be 50 people here, plus news cameras." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. Rex has become more than just my guide dog. He's become a symbol. Inside the courtroom, Thomas and Rex were directed to seats near the front. The prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for fighting hard for victims, stopped by to check on them before proceedings began. "Are you ready?" she asked Thomas quietly. "The judge will want to hear your victim impact statement after the sentencing." Thomas took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm ready. Been thinking about what to say for months." The bailiff called the court to order, and the room fell silent as the judge entered. Ray was brought in, looking thinner than he had 6 months ago, the time in jail while awaiting trial having taken its toll. His lawyer had tried everything to get the charges reduced, but the overwhelming evidence and public outrage had made that impossible. The judge, a silver-haired man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, reviewed the case files one last time before speaking. In the case of the state versus Raymond Miller, this court has found the defendant guilty of assault on a service animal, interfering with the rights of a person with disabilities, and under our state's special protection laws, assault on a retired police K-9 officer. The judge looked directly at Ray. Mr. Miller, your actions that day showed a disturbing lack of respect for both the law and basic human decency. Before I pass sentence, is there anything you wish to say to the court? Ray stood slowly, his shoulders hunched. 6 months of reflection seemed to have changed him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. Your Honor, when I kicked that dog, I wasn't thinking. I was angry, showing off, and I lashed out. I didn't consider who I was hurting or why it was wrong. He paused, turning slightly toward Thomas and Rex. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. There's no excuse for it. I'm sorry, truly sorry, for the pain I caused both of them. The judge nodded, acknowledging the apology but unmoved in his determination to see justice done. Mr. Miller, while I appreciate your remorse, actions have consequences. Based on the severity of your offenses and considering this is not your first encounter with the law, I hereby sentence you to 18 months in state prison, followed by 2 years of probation. Additionally, you will complete 500 hours of community service at the county animal shelter and undergo mandatory anger management counseling. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The sentence was firm but fair, exactly what most had expected. Furthermore, the judge continued, you will be prohibited from owning or caring for any animals for a period of 5 years, and you will pay restitution for all veterinary expenses incurred for the care of the service animal you injured. After the sentencing, the judge invited Thomas to speak. With Rex by his side, Thomas stood and faced the courtroom, his military bearing evident even after all these years. Your Honor, 6 months ago, a single act of cruelty changed many lives, mine, Rex's, and even Mr. Miller's. But something unexpected happened afterward. Our community came together. People who had never thought about service animals before suddenly understood their importance. Thomas rested his hand on Rex's head as he continued. Since that day, Rex and I have visited schools to teach children about service animals. We've helped train police officers about interacting with people who have disabilities. And most importantly, a new program started, one that pairs retired police dogs with veterans who need service animals. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. 10 veterans now have service dogs through the Rex program. 10 people have companions who help them navigate the world despite their disabilities. That's the real justice here, turning one bad moment into something that helps others. The courtroom was silent when Thomas finished speaking. Even the most hardened reporters were blinking back tears. The judge thanked him, genuine emotion in his normally formal voice. Outside, as Thomas and Rex made their way down the courthouse steps, people applauded. Someone shouted, "We love you, Rex," and others joined in with cheers and words of support. A young girl broke away from her mother and approached Thomas, asking politely, "Can I give Rex a treat? My mom says I have to ask first because he's working." Thomas smiled, impressed by her knowledge. That's exactly right. And yes, Rex can have a quick break. He gave Rex the command to release him from work mode for a moment. As the crowd dispersed, a police officer approached with her K-9 partner, a young German shepherd who bore a striking resemblance to Rex. "This is Rex's nephew," she explained proudly. "He's just completed his training last month. We wanted you both to meet him." Thomas knelt down, letting the young dog sniff his hand. "Following in the family business, huh?" Later that evening, Thomas sat in his favorite chair at home, with Rex resting beside him. The TV was on, the news playing footage from the courthouse and calling it the conclusion of a case that changed how the city views service animals. Thomas reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "Well, boy, looks like we made a difference after all." Rex looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. Then, with a contented sigh, the extraordinary dog who had served both the police force and a blind veteran laid his head on Thomas's foot, still on duty, still vigilant, still the hero he had always been.